Let's be real for a second. Your 20s are confusing. Everybody tells you these are supposed to be the best years of your life, but at the same time, you're trying to figure out work, bills, relationships, rent, debt, your future, and somehow also build wealth before it's too late. And when people online talk about money in your 20s, they usually make it sound way too easy. They'll say things like, just invest early and you'll be a millionaire. Technically, that sounds nice. But in real life, most people in their 20s are not sitting around with tons of extra money ready to invest. They're trying to survive. They're trying to get stable. They're trying not to make financial mistakes that follow them for the next 15 years. So, in this video, I want to talk about how to actually build wealth in your 20s, in a real way. Not the fake internet guru version. Not the wake up at 4 AM and buy 5 rental properties version. I mean the real version. The version that works even if you're starting small. Because the truth is, building wealth in your 20s is less about being rich early, and more about putting yourself in a position where your 30s and 40s don't become a constant financial recovery mission. That's what this is really about. It's about building a life where money starts working for you instead of always working against you. The first thing you need to understand is that wealth in your 20s usually does not look impressive. That's important. A lot of people think wealth means looking successful. Nice apartment, nice car, trips, expensive clothes, always outside, always spending, always upgrading. But in your 20s, real wealth usually looks boring. It looks like having money saved when other people don't. It looks like not having credit card debt. It looks like saying no to things you technically could afford, but no, you shouldn't buy. It looks like investing consistently without needing to show anybody. It looks like being patient while everyone else is trying to look ahead. That's the first mindset shift. If you spend your 20s trying to look rich, you'll probably delay actually becoming rich. And a lot of people fall into that trap. They get their first decent paycheck and immediately start financing a better lifestyle. Better car, better phone, better apartment, more eating out, more random spending, more I deserve this. And before they know it, their income went up, but their financial stress went up too. That's why one of the biggest keys to building wealth in your 20s is learning how to create space between what you earn and what you spend. That gap is everything. That gap is where savings come from. That gap is where investing comes from. That gap is where peace of mind comes from. If every dollar you earn is already assigned to bills, subscriptions, food, and impulse spending, there's nothing left to build with. So before you even think about getting rich, ask yourself this: how big is the gap between my income and my lifestyle? Because if your lifestyle rises every time your income rises, you will stay stuck for a long time. Now, this does not mean you need to live a miserable life. It just means you need to be intentional. You do not need to be cheap. You need to be strategic. There's a difference. If you're in your 20s, one of the smartest things you can do is keep your fixed expenses as low as reasonably possible for as long as possible. That means being careful with car payments, rent debt, monthly subscriptions, anything that locks you into a higher lifestyle. Why? Because fixed expenses are dangerous. Once they become your normal, it gets harder to save, harder to invest, and harder to breathe financially. And the crazy part is, most people don't realize they're trapping themselves until they already feel stuck. That's why early wealth building is often more about what you avoid than what you buy. Avoid bad debt. Avoid lifestyle inflation. Avoid the need to constantly impress people. Avoid turning every raise into a spending opportunity. If you can do that, you're already ahead of a lot of people. The next thing you need to focus on is building an emergency fund. This is not the sexy part of money, but it matters more than people think. Because you cannot build wealth if every emergency knocks you back to zero. If your car breaks down and it goes on a credit card, that hurts. If you lose your job and have no savings, that hurts. If life hits you, and it will, and you have no cushion, wealth building stops immediately. So before you obsess over investing huge amounts, build a basic safety net. Even if it starts with just $1,000. Then build it higher. 1 month of expenses. Then maybe 3. The goal is simple. Stop letting normal life disruptions become financial disasters. That alone can change your future. And once you have some breathing room, now you can start doing something that really matters in your 20s. Invest early. Now, I know people say this all the time, but let me explain it in a normal way. Investing early matters because time does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Not because you need to put in huge amounts right away. Even modest investing in your 20s can become powerful later because it has more time to grow. That's the real advantage. Your 20s are not powerful because you make the most money then. Most people don't. Your 20s are powerful because time is still on your side. If you invest at 24, that money has a much longer runway than money invested at 34 or 44. That doesn't mean people who start later are doomed. It just means starting now makes life easier later. And the biggest mistake people make is waiting until they know more. They think they need the perfect strategy, the perfect timing, the perfect amount, the perfect market conditions. But perfection is usually just procrastination in a nicer outfit. You do not need to know everything to start doing something. You need consistency more than brilliance. A lot of wealth in your 20s comes from learning how to do simple things repeatedly. Save, invest, avoid dumb debt, increase income, repeat. That's not flashy, but it works. Another major part of building wealth in your 20s is increasing your earning power. This matters a lot. Because yes, controlling spending is important, but there is a limit to how much you can cut. At some point, income matters more. Your 20s are a great time to get serious about becoming more valuable. That could mean learning a skill, switching industries, asking for better opportunities, starting a side income, becoming excellent at something people pay for. A lot of people stay too passive with income in their 20s. They wait. They hope. They tell themselves they'll figure it out later. But later gets expensive. The earlier you become more valuable in the marketplace, the easier wealth building becomes. Because wealth gets a lot easier when you're trying to save and invest from a growing income instead of a stagnant one. And I want to say something important here. Do not waste your 20s only trying to save money. Also, spend your 20s trying to become worth more money. That is one of the best investments you can make. Sometimes the biggest return doesn't come from the stock market first. Sometimes it comes from you upgrading yourself, your skills, your confidence, your discipline, your ability to solve problems, your ability to communicate, your ability to earn. That matters. Now let's talk about debt for a second. If you want to build wealth in your 20s, you have to respect debt, especially high-interest debt. Because high-interest debt is the opposite of investing. It compounds against you. And that's what makes it dangerous. When people carry credit card balances month after month while also trying to build wealth, they're usually fighting uphill. So if you have bad debt, that needs to become a priority. Not because debt makes you a failure, but because it makes it harder for your money to go anywhere useful. Wealth needs momentum, and debt kills momentum. Another thing people in their 20s need to understand is that your circle matters. A lot. If everyone around you treats money carelessly, normalizes being broke, laughs at discipline, and spends everything they make, it becomes harder to stay focused. You don't need to cut everybody off and become some isolated finance robot. But you do need to protect your mindset. Because the people around you shape what feels normal. And if your environment makes bad money behavior feel normal, you will have to work harder to build a different life. That's why sometimes building wealth in your 20s feels lonely. Because discipline is not always popular. Living below your means is not flashy. Saving money is not exciting to most people. Passing on certain things can make you feel like you're missing out. But missing out on temporary fun is very different from missing out on long-term freedom. And that's really the trade you're making. Short-term image or long-term peace. Short-term validation or long-term options. That's the real choice. Now here's another truth. Nobody says enough. You do not need to have everything figured out in your 20s to still build wealth. You really don't. A lot of people freeze because they think one wrong move ruins everything. It doesn't. You can make mistakes and still recover. You can start late in your 20s and still build wealth. You can switch careers. You can restart. You can rebuild. What matters is that you start taking money seriously before chaos becomes your normal. That's what this decade is really for. Not perfection, direction. If you can spend your 20s doing a few things right, keeping expenses under control, avoiding bad debt, saving consistently, investing early, and improving your income, you give yourself a massive advantage. And maybe the biggest advantage of all is this: you build confidence. Because once you see yourself saving, once you see yourself investing, once you see yourself making better financial decisions, your identity starts to change. You stop seeing money as something that just slips through your hands. You start seeing yourself as someone who can build. And once that identity changes, your behavior changes with it. That's when wealth starts becoming realistic. Not overnight, not instantly, but steadily. So if you're in your 20s right now, here's the message. Do not underestimate this decade. You do not need to be rich by 29. You do not need to hit every milestone early. You do not need to look successful. What you need to do is build the foundation. Because the people who win financially later are usually the people who got serious earlier, even if nobody noticed at the time. Keep your lifestyle manageable. Build your emergency fund. Invest early. Increase your income. Avoid bad debt. Stay consistent. Be patient. That is how wealth starts. It starts quietly. And if you do that in your 20s, you are giving your future self a gift that most people don't fully appreciate until it's much harder to catch up. Your 20s are not about proving anything to the world. They're about putting yourself in position. And if you do that well, your 30s become stronger, your 40s become easier, and your life becomes a lot more flexible. That's the goal. Not just money. Freedom. This is Sovereign Finance. If you want more videos on building wealth, personal finance, and getting ahead without the fake guru nonsense, subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.